After my wife passed away, I started volunteering at the VA medical center at night. After every shift, the same driver took me home, and I always brought him coffee. One night, he drove past my house and said, "Don't go home tonight. I'll tell you why later." And he drove me to a place I never expected. I was horrified, my face drained of all color. "I'm grateful you're here today. Where are you watching from? Drop your city below. I love connecting with viewers worldwide." A quick reminder, this is a fictional story with dramatized elements for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental, but the underlying message is meaningful. Let's begin. If my Uber driver had not driven past my house that night, I would have walked through my front door and straight into something I never would have survived. I am Robert Hayes. I am 68 years old, and this is my true story from Pasadena, California. It was a Tuesday night in late January, and I was sitting in the back seat of Thomas's navy blue Honda Accord. The heater was humming softly, and the faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, left over from the thermos Thomas always kept wedged in his cup holder. We were driving down Colorado Boulevard, the same route we had taken dozens of times before. My volunteer shift at the VA Medical Center had ended at 10:30, and Thomas had picked me up right on time, the way he always did. I watched the familiar streets glide past the window storefronts I had known for decades. Traffic lights I had memorized, corners where Margaret and I used to stop for ice cream on summer evenings. Everything looked the same. Everything felt safe. And then Thomas drove right past Cedar Street. I leaned forward. "Thomas, you just missed the turn." He did not respond. His hands tightened on the steering wheel knuckles, pale under the glow of the dashboard lights. His jaw was set, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Thomas," I said again, louder this time. Just that was my street. He exhaled slowly, and when he finally spoke, his voice was steady but low. "Mr. Hayes, I need you to stay calm, and I need you to trust me." Something cold settled in my stomach. I had known Thomas for months. He was dependable, punctual kind. He had never once missed my exit. He had never looked this tense. "What's going on?" I asked. "I'll explain," he said quietly. "But not yet. Not until we're somewhere safe." Safe. That word triggered something in me, a memory I had buried deep, a feeling I had not allowed myself to revisit in 8 months. I was standing in the hallway of Huntington Memorial Hospital in Glendale. The fluorescent lights overhead were too bright, the air too sterile, the floor too cold beneath my shoes. A doctor in green scrubs walked toward me, his face carefully neutral, his hands folded in front of him. "Mr. Hayes," he said gently. "I'm very sorry. We did everything we could." I do not remember what I said. I do not remember if I said anything at all. I only remember the sound of my own breathing too loud in the silence and the way the walls seemed to tilt. Margaret was gone. The police had called me 3 hours earlier. A semi-truck had rear-ended her car on the 210 freeway near the exit for La Cañada Flintridge. The driver had been texting. He had not seen her brake lights. He had not even tried to stop. Her car had spun across 2 lanes and collided with the center divider. The impact had been catastrophic. They let me see her one last time. She was lying in a hospital bed, her face peaceful, her hands folded across her chest. I sat down beside her and took her hand. It was still warm. 42 years, I whispered. We were supposed to have more time. We had met in 1982 at a JPL recruitment fair. She had been a grad student in materials science. I had been a young engineer fresh out of Caltech. She had asked me a question about thermal shielding, and I had fumbled the answer so badly that she had laughed. We were married 6 months later. 42 years. 2 sons. A house in Pasadena with a lemon tree in the backyard. Thousands of Sunday mornings with coffee and crossword puzzles. Thousands of nights watching the stars from our porch. And then, in one moment on the 210 freeway, it was over. I buried her on a gray afternoon in February. Our sons flew in from Phoenix and Denver. Jessica, our daughter, stood beside me at the graveside, her hand on my shoulder. Her husband, Brad, stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. I remember thinking how quiet it was, how still. I remember thinking that this was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. Thomas turned onto a side street I did not recognize. The glow of streetlights flickered through the windshield, casting long shadows across his face. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my knees. "Thomas," I said, "please, tell me what's happening." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, "there were two men standing outside your house tonight." My breath caught. "They were waiting for you." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words. Two men, waiting. For me. "Who?" I managed. Thomas did not answer right away. He turned into an empty parking lot behind a Vaughn's grocery store and put the car in park. Then he turned around to face me. "I don't know who they are," he said, "but I know who sent them." The weight of those words hit me like a physical blow. I had thought losing Margaret was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. I was wrong. The house felt different without her. Not just quiet, empty. Every morning I woke up to the same thing, sunlight slanting through the blinds, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint creak of the floorboards as I walked downstairs. But there was no coffee brewing. No crossword puzzle spread open on the dining table. No Margaret humming softly as she watered the lemon tree in the backyard. Just silence. I had lived in that house for nearly 30 years. Margaret and I had bought it in the mid-90s, back when old Pasadena was still affordable, or at least what passed for affordable in Southern California. It was a craftsman-style bungalow, with a wide front porch, a detached garage, and a backyard shaded by a single jacaranda tree. The real estate agent had told us it was worth maybe $400,000 back then. Now, according to the latest assessment, it was valued at $2.3 million. I had also accumulated just over $600,000 in my retirement accounts, saved carefully over 32 years as an aerospace systems engineer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. I had retired 3 years earlier at 65, after spending most of my career designing thermal management systems for deep space missions. It had been a good life, a stable life, but now sitting alone in that big house every evening, I felt like a guest in my own home. Jessica came to visit the day after the funeral. She was my daughter, 38, slim, with her mother's dark hair and careful way of speaking. She stood on the porch and hugged me tightly, her shoulders shaking. "I'm so sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." I held her and said nothing. What was there to say? Her husband Brad had driven her over, but he stayed outside by the car. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a clean-shaven face and the kind of posture that looked rehearsed. He did not come inside. He did not offer condolences. He just leaned against the hood of his car with his arms crossed, staring at his phone. Jessica pulled back and wiped her eyes. "Dad, if you need anything at all, just call me. I'm here for you. I mean it." I believed her. At the time, I truly believed her. She visited twice more in the following weeks, bringing casseroles I did not eat, and asking careful questions about how I was sleeping, whether I was eating, if I needed help with paperwork. I told her I was fine. I told her I was managing. I was not fine. But I did not know how to say that. The nights were the hardest. I tried watching television. I tried reading. But the house pressed in on me, the silence so thick I could feel it against my skin. I started going to bed later and later, hoping exhaustion would pull me under before my thoughts could catch up. It did not work. So I did what Harold told me to do. I kept moving. Harold was 82, a former Air Force pilot who had flown cargo missions in Vietnam. I met him at the VA Medical Center in downtown Los Angeles, where I had started volunteering 3 nights a week, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, from 6 in the evening until 10:30 at night. The center ran a technical training program for veterans transitioning into civilian careers, and they needed someone who could teach basic engineering skills, circuitry design, and systems troubleshooting. I was not a teacher, but I needed somewhere to go. Harold was one of the older volunteers, a wiry man with a white beard and sharp blue eyes. He had lost his wife 6 years earlier, and he told me the same thing every time he saw me slumped in the break room after a shift. "Listen, kid," he said one night, pouring himself a cup of burnt coffee from the communal pot. "You gotta keep moving. The second you stop, the pain catches up. Trust me." "I know." I nodded. I did not tell him that the pain had already caught up, that it had been there the whole time, sitting in the passenger seat of my life, waiting for me to acknowledge it. One Thursday night in late October, I almost caused an accident on the drive home. I had been staring at the road for so long that the white lines started to blur together, and I did not see the red light at the intersection of Arroyo and California until I was already halfway through it. A car honked. Tires screeched. I jerked the wheel and pulled over, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I sat there for 10 minutes trying to catch my breath. The next morning, my son called. He lived in Arizona, now worked in finance, and we had not spoken much since the funeral. He asked how I was doing, and I told him about the near miss. "Dad," he said, his voice careful, "maybe you should think about using a rideshare service, at least at night, just until your vision adjusts." I resented the suggestion, but I also knew he was right. So the following Tuesday, I downloaded the Uber app. I felt ridiculous. I was a man who had spent 3 decades designing systems that traveled to the outer reaches of the solar system, and I could not figure out how to request a car on my phone. It took me 15 minutes just to enter my credit card information. But at 10:30 that night, when my shift at the VA ended, I stood outside the building and tapped the button. 5 minutes later, a navy blue Honda Accord pulled up to the curb. The driver rolled down the window. He was a black man in his mid-40s with close-cropped hair and a calm, steady voice. "Mr. Hayes," he asked. I nodded and climbed into the back seat. The car was clean. There was a faint scent of lemon from an air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror, and the upholstery was spotless. I noticed a small thermos wedged into the cup holder and a neatly folded jacket on the passenger seat. "Good evening," the driver said. "I'm Thomas. I'll get you home safe." I nodded again, still feeling awkward. I was not used to being driven by strangers. I was not used to sitting in the back seat of someone else's car. Thomas did not try to make small talk. He simply put the car in drive and pulled smoothly into traffic. His hands were steady on the wheel. His movements were deliberate, controlled. He did not speed. He did not weave through lanes. He drove the way someone drives when they actually care about the person sitting behind them. When we pulled up outside my house on Cedar Street, I reached for my wallet, but Thomas shook his head. "It's already charged to your card, Mr. Hayes. You're all set." I thanked him and opened the door, but I noticed something as I walked up the driveway. Thomas did not drive away. He waited, his car idling at the curb, headlights still on engine, humming softly. He waited until I had unlocked my front door, stepped inside, and turned on the porch light. Only then did he pull away. I did not think much of it at the time. It seemed like a small gesture, polite, maybe even standard practice for rideshare drivers. But looking back now, I realize that was the first sign that Thomas saw things other people missed. Over the next 3 weeks, Thomas became the one constant in my routine. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, I would stand outside the VA Medical Center at 10:30, phone in hand, and request a ride. And every time without fail, it was Thomas who pulled up to the curb in his navy blue Honda Accord. At first I thought it was a coincidence, but after the 5th or 6th time I started to wonder. One Thursday night, as I climbed into the back seat, I finally asked, "Do you work this area a lot?" Thomas glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "I run the night shift, downtown to Pasadena mostly. It's quieter, safer for riders heading home late." "Makes sense," I said. He nodded. "Plus, I know the streets pretty well by now. Don't need the GPS half the time." As if to prove his point, he pulled away from the curb and took a left onto Alameda without even glancing at his phone. He knew exactly where he was going. By the second week, I stopped sitting in the back seat. It felt too formal, too much like being chauffeured. One night I opened the front passenger door instead, and Thomas did not seem surprised. He just adjusted the seat back a little to give me more legroom and said, "Welcome aboard." We started talking. Not about anything heavy, just small things. The weather, the Lakers' most recent loss, the construction on the 110 freeway that had been dragging on for months. Thomas was easy to talk to. He did not pry. He did not ask questions that made me uncomfortable. He just listened, nodded, and occasionally offered a comment or two. One night he asked about my work at the VA. "You volunteer there, right?" he said, etching technical skills. "Yeah," I said. "Basic engineering, circuitry systems, troubleshooting. Most of the guys are veterans trying to transition into civilian jobs. A lot of them have skills but no certifications. No one's ever taught them how to translate what they know into something an employer will recognize." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's good work. A lot of vets don't get the support they need when they come back. They're just expected to figure it all out on their own." "Exactly," I said. "And most of them do. But it shouldn't have to be that way." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road. Then he said, "My uncle was a Marine, 2 tours in Iraq. When he came back, he couldn't hold down a job for more than a few months. Not because he didn't want to work. He just couldn't sleep. Couldn't sit still. Couldn't handle being in a room with too many people." "I'm sorry," I said. Thomas shrugged. "He's doing better now. Got into carpentry. Works alone most of the time. It helps." I did not say anything. I just nodded. It was mid-November when I brought the coffee. The nights were getting colder, and I had started noticing that Thomas kept his jacket on even when the heater was running. So one Thursday, I bought 2 cups of black coffee from the break room vending machine at the VA, cheap, burnt, but hot, and carried them both outside. When Thomas pulled up, I opened the passenger door and handed him one of the cups. "I thought you might need this," I said. "It's starting to get cold out." Thomas stared at the cup for a moment, surprised. "Mr. Hayes, you didn't have to do that." "Call me Robert," I said. "And yes, I did. You've been reliable. That matters." He took the cup slowly, like he was not quite sure what to do with it. Then he lifted it to his lips and took a careful sip. A small smile crossed his face. "Black, no sugar. How'd you know?" I settled into the passenger seat and buckled my seatbelt. "I pay attention, too." Thomas laughed a quiet, genuine laugh and set the cup in his holder. "Fair enough." That night, the conversation flowed easier than it ever had before. Thomas told me about his daughter, Keisha. She was 16, a junior in high school, sharp as a whip, and already thinking about college. "She wants to study aerospace engineering," Thomas said, his voice tinged with pride. "Like you did." I turned to look at him. Aerospace. Yeah, she's obsessed with space. Always has been. When she was little, she used to make me take her to the Griffith Observatory every other weekend. She'd stand in front of the planetarium displays for hours, reading every single plaque. I smiled. She sounds like a smart kid. She is, Thomas said. Smarter than me, that's for sure. She's already taking AP calculus. I can barely help her with her homework anymore. If she ever wants to talk to someone in the field, I said, I'd be happy to answer questions. I spent 32 years at JPL. I know a few people. Thomas glanced at me, his expression softening. That's kind of you, Robert. Really? I shrugged. It's the least I can do. We drove in comfortable silence for a while after that. The glow of the streetlights flickered past. The hum of the engine filled the space between us, and for the first time in months, I did not feel completely alone. That was the night I realized Thomas was not just a driver. He was someone who listened, someone who cared, someone who paid attention to the small things that most people missed. And I had no idea how much that would matter in the weeks to come. The following week, Thomas told me why he drove at night. It was a Thursday, and we were stuck in traffic on the 110 freeway. A jackknifed semi had blocked 2 lanes near the Exposition Boulevard exit, and we were barely moving. The glow of brake lights stretched out in front of us like a river of red. Thomas had turned off the engine to save gas, and for a while we just sat there in the quiet. So, I said, breaking the silence, have you always been a driver? Thomas glanced at me, his hands resting on the steering wheel. He was quiet for a moment, like he was deciding whether or not to answer. No, he said finally. I used to work for an insurance company, Liberty Mutual. I was a claims investigator, specialized in fraud detection. I turned to look at him. Fraud detection. He nodded. Medical claims, mostly. Car accidents, workplace injuries. People try to game the system all the time. My job was to figure out who was lying and who wasn't. How long did you do that? 12 years, Thomas said. Started right out of college. I was good at it too. I had a knack for spotting inconsistencies, details that didn't add up, stories that changed every time someone told them. What made you stop? Thomas exhaled slowly. Traffic started to creep forward, and he turned the engine back on. He did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. 3 years ago, I was assigned to a case, a physician in Glendale. He was billing Medicare for treatments that never happened, physical therapy sessions, prescriptions, procedures. He was targeting elderly patients, people who didn't really understand their own medical records. I felt something tighten in my chest. What happened? I caught him, Thomas said. Took me 6 months, but I built a solid case. Falsified records, forged signatures, payments routed through shell accounts. It was textbook fraud. I turned in my report thinking I'd done the right thing. He paused, his jaw tight. And the doctor had connections. He played golf with one of the vice presidents at the company. Within 2 weeks, I was called into a meeting with HR. They told me to close the case, told me the evidence wasn't strong enough, told me to move on. But you didn't, I said. Thomas shook his head. I refused. I went over their heads, filed a formal complaint with the state insurance board. I thought someone would listen. Did they? Eventually, Thomas said. But by then, the company had already fired me. They said I wasn't a cultural fit, that I didn't understand how to be a team player. I stared at him, stunned. That's legal, Thomas finished. At-will employment. They didn't need a reason. Traffic started moving again, and Thomas merged into the right lane. His hands were steady on the wheel, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "What about your family?" I asked carefully. "My ex-wife couldn't handle it," Thomas said. "The lost income, the legal fees, the uncertainty. We fought about it constantly. 6 months after I got fired, Diane filed for divorce. She moved to San Diego, left Keisha with me." "I'm sorry," I said. Thomas shrugged. "It is what it is. Keisha's doing fine. That's what matters. And you ended up driving for Uber." "After a while, yeah," Thomas said. "I tried a few other things first. Security work, private investigations, but nothing stuck. Uber made sense. Flexible hours. I can take Keisha to school in the morning, pick her up in the afternoon, and drive nights while she's doing homework." He was quiet for a moment. Then he added, "I failed those elderly patients 3 years ago. I couldn't protect them. But I won't make that mistake again." The weight of those words hung in the air between us. Around the same time, Jessica started visiting more often. It was subtle at first. She had always been busy, her job, her husband, her own life. But suddenly she was showing up at my house 3 Sundays in a row. That had not happened since she got married. She brought casseroles. She cleaned the kitchen. She asked if I was eating enough, sleeping well, taking my vitamins. "Dad, are you sure you're okay?" she asked one Sunday afternoon, standing in my living room with her arms crossed. "You seem tired." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said. "Just the usual." She nodded, but she did not look convinced. Then she said, "Have you thought about updating your will, after Mom?" I blinked. "Not yet. Why is something wrong?" No, Jessica said quickly. "I just want to make sure everything's in order. Just in case." "Just in case of what?" She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Just in case, Dad. That's all." The following Sunday, she asked about my retirement accounts. "Who's listed as the beneficiary on your 401k?" she asked, as casually as if she were asking about the weather. "You are," I said. "You're my only daughter." She smiled again, and this time there was something else in her expression, something I could not quite place. Brad still had not come inside. He sat in the driveway, engine running, waiting for her. At the time, I thought Jessica was just being thoughtful, caring, maybe even a little overprotective. But warmth was a lie. The questions she was asking were not about love. They were about money. On the 4th Sunday, Jessica said something that should have been a warning. She was standing in my kitchen, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. I was sitting at the table reading the newspaper. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind we used to have when she was younger, before she got married, before everything became so complicated. "Dad," she said, not looking up from the stove, "you've been forgetting things lately." I glanced up. "What do you mean?" She turned to face me, her expression carefully neutral. "Last week you called me Jennifer. That's not my name." I blinked. You did, she said. "And you asked me about Mom's book club. Mom stopped going to book club 3 years ago." I felt something shift inside me, a small, uncomfortable flicker of doubt. "I don't remember that." "I know," Jessica said gently. "That's what worries me." I set the newspaper down. "Sweetheart, I think I was just distracted. It happens." "Maybe, she said. "But it's happening more often. Have you thought about seeing a doctor?" "A doctor," I said. "For what?" "Memory issues, Dad. At your age, they can be serious." I frowned. "I'm 68. A little forgetfulness is normal." Jessica crossed her arms. "I know, but Mom would have wanted me to make sure you're okay." The mention of Margaret hit me harder than I expected. I looked away. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. I'll make an appointment. Jessica smiled, but there was something brittle about it. Good. I'll feel better knowing you're taking care of yourself. After she left, I sat alone at the kitchen table for a long time. I tried to remember if I had really called her Jennifer. I tried to remember if I had asked about Margaret's book club. But the more I tried, the less certain I became. What I did not know then, what I would not learn until much later, was that around the same time, Thomas was hearing something strange in his car. Something about me. It was 2 nights later, a Tuesday just after 11:15. Thomas had just dropped me off at my house on Cedar Street and was heading back toward downtown when his phone pinged with a new ride request. The pickup was at a bar called the Edison on Spring Street, a dimly lit speakeasy-style place that catered to businessmen and late-night drinkers. Thomas pulled up to the curb and waited. A man stumbled out of the bar a few minutes later. He was tall, broad-shouldered, well-dressed in a way that looked expensive but disheveled. His tie was loose, his collar unbuttoned. He reeked of whiskey. Thomas unlocked the doors. The man climbed into the back seat and slumped against the window. "Glendale," the man muttered. "I'll put the address in." Thomas nodded and pulled into traffic. He had driven plenty of drunk passengers before. Most of them were harmless, tired, chatty, or passed out in the back seat. This man seemed angry. "Goddamn old man," the man muttered under his breath. "Sitting on all that money, doing nothing with it." Thomas kept his eyes on the road. He did not respond. The man pulled out his phone and made a call. He did not bother lowering his voice. "Yeah, I'm handling it," the man said loudly. "She's got him wrapped around her finger. Just need a few more weeks." Thomas glanced at the rearview mirror. The man was staring out the window, his jaw tight. "The house in Pasadena alone is worth over $2 million, the man continued. "Plus the retirement accounts. We're talking $3 million easy." Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. Pasadena. Old man. $3 million. He kept his face neutral, his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind was racing. "Just get the paperwork signed," the man said. "Once he's declared incompetent, we move him into a facility. Then we sell the house and liquidate the accounts. Simple." Thomas turned onto the 134 freeway, his thoughts spinning. He had heard enough drunk passengers say stupid things to fill a book, but this was different. This was deliberate, calculated. The man ended the call and tossed his phone onto the seat beside him. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Thomas drove in silence. When they reached the address in Glendale, a modern condo complex near Brand Boulevard, the man climbed out without a word. No tip. No thank you. Just the sound of the car door slamming shut. Thomas sat in the driveway for a moment, staring at the empty street. Pasadena. An old man. $3 million. He did not know who the old man was. Not yet, but he had just heard the first piece of a picture that was about to involve me. 5 days later, something happened that I had no idea about. But it would save my life. Thomas told me this story months later, after everything was over. I am telling it to you now, so you understand just how close I came to losing everything. It was a Tuesday night, 5 days after Thomas had driven the drunk man home to Glendale. He was sitting in his car near the VA Medical Center waiting for his next ride request when his phone pinged. The name on the screen was Brad M. Thomas stared at it for a moment. Brad, the drunk man from the bar. The one who had talked about an old man in Pasadena and $3 million. Thomas accepted the ride. The pickup location was a bar called the Golden Gopher on South Main Street, a narrow, dimly lit place that smelled like spilled beer and old wood. Thomas pulled up to the curb at 10:50 and waited. A few minutes later, Brad stumbled out. He looked worse than he had the first time, tie hanging loose, shirt untucked, eyes unfocused. He climbed into the back seat and slumped against the window. "Glendale," he muttered. "Same place as last time." Thomas nodded and pulled into traffic. He did not say anything. He just drove, keeping his eyes on the road, his ears open. For the first few minutes, Brad was silent. Then his phone rang. "Yeah," Brad said loudly. "I'm on my way." Thomas glanced at the rearview mirror. Brad was staring out the window, his jaw tight. "The doctor agreed," Brad said. "Dr. Lawson, $10,000. He'll sign the paperwork. Says the old man has early onset cognitive decline." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. He kept his face neutral, his hands steady on the wheel. "After that, we get power of attorney," Brad continued. "You move him into a facility, sell the house, easy." Thomas's mind was racing. Power of attorney, facility, sell the house. This was not just talk. This was a plan. "Jessica's getting nervous," Brad said. "She says he's not that bad. But I told her we don't have time. Between the two of us, we're $400,000 in debt. They're coming to collect. $400,000. That was the motive." "The old man volunteers downtown," Brad said. "Perfect. We'll say the stress was too much for him." Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. Downtown. The VA center. Could it be? Brad leaned his head back and closed his eyes. His voice dropped to a mumble. "Pasadena, Cedar Street." Thomas nearly slammed on the brakes. Cedar Street. That was my street. He forced himself to keep driving, to keep his breathing steady, but inside his mind was spinning. Old man. Pasadena. Cedar Street. Volunteers downtown. Daughter named Jessica. It was me. The old man was Robert Hayes. Thomas dropped Brad off at the same condo complex in Glendale. Brad stumbled out of the car without a word, without a tip, without even looking back. Thomas sat in the driveway for 10 minutes, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his heart pounding. When he finally drove away, he did not go back to work. He drove straight home. It was 1:30 in the morning when Thomas walked into his kitchen. Keisha was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet. He sat down at the table, pulled out his phone, and opened his notes app. He wrote down everything. Date Tuesday, November 14th. Time 10:50 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. Passenger Brad M. Same man from November 9th. Key phrases: old man, Pasadena, Cedar Street. Doctor Lawson, $10,000, fake dementia diagnosis. Power of attorney facility, sell house $2 million plus. Daughter Jessica, $400,000 debt. Thomas stared at the screen for a long time. Then he opened a web browser and typed, Elder Financial Abuse Power of Attorney California. The results filled his screen. Articles about conservatorship fraud. Stories about families draining their elderly relatives' bank accounts. Legal definitions of financial exploitation. It was a common scam. And it was happening to me. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his mind drifting back to 3 years ago. The physician in Glendale. The falsified medical records. The elderly patients who had trusted him. The case he had tried to stop. The case he had failed to stop. He looked down at his phone and typed one more line into his notes. Robert Hayes, 68, Pasadena, target. Daughter Jessica. Son-in-law Brad M. Plan fake dementia, obtain POA, place in facility, liquidate assets. Need proof. Thomas set his phone down on the table and sat in the dark for a long time. He had made a decision that night. He was not going to look the other way this time. He was not going to let another elderly person be exploited. But first he needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof. What I did not know then was that Thomas was about to do something that scared even him, and was technically illegal. Thomas told me this part of the story later after everything was over. At the time, I was going about my life as usual, teaching veterans at the VA center, worrying about my memory, trying to convince myself that Jessica was just being thoughtful. I had no idea what Thomas was doing. The morning after Thomas made his notes, he drove to a Best Buy on South Lake Avenue in Pasadena. He walked to the electronics section and bought a dash camera with built-in audio recording. It cost him $140 money he did not really have, but could not afford not to spend. He installed it that afternoon. The camera sat just below his rearview mirror, a small black box with a blinking red light. Most passengers never noticed it, and if they did, they assumed it was standard equipment for rideshare drivers. Thomas also checked Uber's terms of service. He read the section on recordings carefully. Drivers may record rides for safety purposes. Passengers consent to recording by using the service. It was not explicit permission, but it was enough legal cover for Thomas to feel like he was not breaking the law. At least not completely. He also turned on the Voice Memos app on his iPhone and tucked the phone into the pocket behind the passenger seat. Backup audio, just in case. Thomas knew that if Brad ever found out, he could be sued. He could lose his Uber account. He could be accused of invasion of privacy. But he also knew that I had brought him coffee on a cold night. That I had treated him like a person, not just a driver. That I had offered to help his daughter. And Thomas was not going to let my family destroy me. 3 nights later, Friday, November 17th at 11:40 p.m., Thomas's phone pinged with a new ride request. The name on the screen was Brad M. Thomas's heart pounded. He glanced at the dash camera. The red light was blinking. He checked his phone in the seat pocket. Voice Memos was recording. He accepted the ride. The pickup location was Commerce Casino, a sprawling gambling complex southeast of downtown Los Angeles. Thomas pulled into the valet lane and waited. Brad stumbled out of the main entrance a few minutes later. He looked worse than Thomas had ever seen him. His shirt was untucked, his tie missing his face, flushed and sweaty. He reeked of whiskey and cigarette smoke. He climbed into the back seat and slumped against the window. "Glendale," he muttered. Thomas nodded and pulled out of the parking lot. He kept his face neutral, his hands steady on the wheel. He did not say a word. For the first few minutes, Brad was silent. Then his phone rang. "Yeah." Brad said, his voice loud and slurred. I hired them. 2 guys. They know what to do." Thomas's pulse quickened. He kept his eyes on the road. "If the old man signs the paperwork, great," Brad continued. "If he doesn't, they'll persuade him." Thomas heard a voice on the other end of the line, faint but audible. "How hard?" the voice asked. Brad laughed. "Whatever it takes. Just don't leave marks. Make it look like he fell or something." Thomas's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "Jessica doesn't know about this part," Brad said. "She thinks we're just moving him into a care facility nice and clean. But I'm not taking any chances." There was a pause. Then Brad added, "The old man lives alone. Big house. Easy target." Thomas forced himself to keep breathing, to keep his face blank, to keep driving. "Next week," Brad said. "We'll do it next week. After he gets home from volunteering, he'll be tired. His guard will be down." Thomas felt his stomach drop. Next week. That meant I had 7 days. Maybe less. Brad ended the call and tossed his phone onto the seat beside him. He leaned his head back and closed his eyes. Thomas drove in silence. When they reached the condo in Glendale, Brad climbed out without a word. No tip. No thank you. Just the sound of the car door slamming shut. Thomas sat in the driveway, engine idling, staring at the empty street. He pulled out his phone and stopped the voice memos recording. 25 minutes. He had 25 minutes of Brad's voice, clear and unmistakable, talking about hiring 2 men to persuade an old man in Pasadena. Thomas sat there for a long time, his hands shaking. This was not just financial fraud anymore. This was not just about stealing my money. This was a plan to hurt me, maybe even to make sure I did not wake up. That week, I noticed Thomas seemed tense. I did not understand why. What I did not know, what Thomas told me months later, was that he was struggling with an impossible choice. He told me about the night he almost gave up. It was 2 a.m. on a Saturday. Thomas had just gotten home after dropping Brad off in Glendale. The house was dark. Keisha was asleep upstairs. Thomas sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone, unable to sleep. He had 25 minutes of recorded audio sitting in his voice memos app. Clear, undeniable evidence that someone was planning to hurt an elderly man in Pasadena. Someone was planning to hurt me. But what was he supposed to do with it? If he went to the police, they would ask him who the victim was. They would ask him how he knew, and he would have to admit that he had been recording passengers in his car without their explicit consent. He could lose his Uber account. He could be sued for invasion of privacy. He could even be charged with a crime. And even if the police believed him, even if they took him seriously, would I believe him? Would I trust a rideshare driver I had only known for a few weeks over my own daughter? Thomas sat there in the dark, his head in his hands, replaying the recording in his mind. Brad's voice, the casual cruelty of it. Make it look like he fell or something. Thomas had failed once before. 3 years ago, he had tried to stop a fraud case, and he had been punished for it. He had lost his job, his marriage, his career. And now he was being asked to risk everything again. For a man he barely knew, he was about to turn off his phone and go to bed when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Keisha appeared in the doorway wearing an oversized Caltech sweatshirt and holding a glass of water. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she looked half asleep. "Dad," she said. "You okay?" Thomas looked up. "Yeah, sweetheart. Just couldn't sleep." Keisha sat down across from him at the table. She set her water down and studied his face the way she always did when she knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked. Thomas hesitated. "What if someone you cared about was in danger from their own family and they didn't know it?" Keisha frowned. "Then you'd tell them." "What if they didn't believe me?" "Then you'd show them proof," Keisha said simply. "You're good at that, Dad. That's what you used to do for a living." Thomas was quiet. Keisha leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Dad, you've spent my whole life telling me that the worst thing a person can do is see something wrong and look away. You've told me that over and over. Don't start looking away now." Thomas felt something loosen in his chest. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you, sweetheart." She smiled. "Go to bed, Dad. You'll figure it out." Thomas nodded. And in that moment, sitting in the dark kitchen with his daughter, he made his decision. He was going to act. He was going to protect me whether I believed him or not. The following Tuesday night, I climbed into Thomas's car with 2 cups of coffee the way I always did. Thomas took one of the cups, but he did not drink right away. He just held it in his hands, staring out the windshield. "Mr. Hayes," he said carefully, "can I ask you something personal?" I glanced at him, surprised. Of course. Your daughter, Jessica. Do you see her often? I smiled. More than I used to. She's been wonderful since Margaret passed. She visits almost every week now. Thomas nodded slowly. Has she been asking about your finances, your money, things like that? I blinked, caught off guard. Well, yes. She's concerned about estate planning, making sure everything's in order. That's normal, isn't it? Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I've seen a lot of things in my old job, Mr. Hayes. I worked in insurance fraud for 12 years, and I learned that sometimes the people who seem the most caring, the most concerned, have other reasons. I felt a flicker of discomfort. Thomas, what are you trying to say? He turned to look at me, his expression serious. Just be careful. Make sure you're trusting the right people. I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. Thomas, Jessica is my daughter. Of course I trust her. Thomas did not say anything. He just nodded and started driving. We rode in silence for a while. The glow of the streetlights flickered past the windows. The hum of the engine filled the space between us. When we pulled up outside my house on Cedar Street, Thomas turned to me one more time. Mr. Hayes, he said quietly. If anything ever feels wrong, anything at all, call me. Okay, I mean it. I nodded, still confused. Okay, Thomas, I will. I watched him drive away, wondering what that conversation had been about. 2 days later, on Thursday afternoon, Jessica showed up at my house with 2 bags of Chinese takeout. We ate together in the kitchen orange chicken fried rice egg rolls, and for a while, it felt like old times. Like before Margaret died. Like when Jessica was still my little girl. Then after we finished eating, Jessica set down her fork and looked at me. Dad, she said gently, I made you a doctor's appointment. I blinked. What? You said you'd go, she said. Remember to get your memory checked. I hesitated. I did. Yes. Jessica said, her voice soft and patient. And Dad, this week you called me twice to ask me the same question. You asked me if I had heard from your accountant, both times, and you forgot we had plans for lunch on Tuesday. I stared at her, my stomach sinking. I did not remember calling twice. I did not remember any lunch plans on Tuesday. A cold knot formed in my chest. I really forgot. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Yes, Dad, you did. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully and slid it across the table. Dr. Richard Lawson, she said. He's a geriatric specialist. Monday at 2 p.m. I'll drive you. We'll figure this out together. I looked down at the paper. Dr. Lawson's name was printed in neat black letters along with an address in Glendale. Mom would want you to take care of yourself, Jessica whispered. I reached across the table and took her hand. Okay, sweetheart. I'll go. Jessica smiled and wiped her eyes. Thank you, Dad. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. After she left, I sat alone in the kitchen staring at the appointment slip on the table. I felt grateful for Jessica. Grateful that she cared so much. Grateful that I was not facing this alone. I did not know that she had just set a trap, and I had walked straight into it. That Friday night, Thomas picked up Brad one more time, and this time he heard the exact timeline. Thomas told me this later. At the time, I was home sitting in my living room, watching television, completely unaware that my life was being planned out by strangers. Thomas was in his car recording evidence that would save my life. It was 11:20 p.m. when Thomas's phone pinged with a new ride request. The name on the screen was Brad M. The pickup location was a bar on East Colorado Boulevard in Pasadena. Thomas's stomach dropped. East Colorado. That was less than 10 blocks from my house. He accepted the ride and drove toward the pickup location, his heart pounding. The dash camera was recording. His phone was recording. Everything was ready. Brad walked out of the bar a few minutes later. This time he was not drunk. He was sober, clear-eyed. And somehow that made him more dangerous. He climbed into the back seat and gave Thomas an address in Glendale. Thomas nodded and started driving. For the first few minutes, Brad was silent. Then his phone rang. "Yeah," Brad said. "Let me confirm the timeline." Thomas kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel. "The doctor sees him on Monday," Brad said. "Dr. Lawson signs the paperwork. Cognitive decline. We'll have power of attorney by Wednesday." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. "Wednesday night," Brad continued. "When he gets home from volunteering, you go in. He'll be alone. Just get him to sign the asset transfer. If he refuses..." There was a pause. "We know what to do," a voice said on the other end of the line. Brad's voice was cold. "Make it clean, old man. Heart attack, whatever. Just make it look natural." Thomas's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "Jessica still thinks we're just moving him into a care facility," Brad said. "She doesn't know about this part, and she's not going to." Thomas forced himself to keep breathing, to keep his face blank, to keep driving. "Wednesday night," Brad repeated. "After 10:30. He gets home around 11. You'll have plenty of time." The voice on the phone said something Thomas could not quite hear. Brad laughed. "No cameras, no alarm system, big house, easy target?" Thomas turned onto the 134 freeway, his mind racing. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Brad was staring out the window, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. When they reached Brad's condo in Glendale, Thomas made a point of noting the exact address. He watched Brad climb out of the car, walk up the front steps, and disappear inside. Then Thomas sat in the driveway for a long time, staring at the building. He pulled out his phone and opened his calendar. Today was Friday. Monday I would see Dr. Lawson. Wednesday Brad would have power of attorney. Wednesday night, 2 men would be waiting for me. Thomas did the math in his head. I had 6 days, and on the 6th day, 2 men would be inside my house. Not to scare me, not to threaten me, to make sure I did not wake up. Thomas drove home in silence. It was after midnight when he pulled into his driveway. The house was dark. Keisha was asleep. He walked into the kitchen, sat down at the table, and opened his phone. He had 4 audio recordings now. 4 separate conversations spanning 3 weeks. Total runtime 25 minutes. He played them back one by one, listening to Brad's voice. Cold, calculating, unrepentant. Thomas opened his notes app and reviewed everything he had written. Ride 1 November 9. Old man Pasadena, $3 million facility power of attorney. Ride 2 November 14. Dr. Lawson, $10,000 dementia diagnosis. Cedar Street, Jessica, $400,000 debt. Ride 3 November 17. Hired 2 guys. Persuade him. Make it look like he fell. Ride 4 November 24. Monday, Dr. Lawson. Wednesday, power of attorney. Wednesday night, go in, make it look natural. Thomas backed up all 4 recordings to iCloud. Then he backed them up again to Google Drive. Then he opened his email and composed a message to himself. Subject evidence. Robert Hayes case. Open if something happens to me. He attached all 4 audio files along with screenshots of his notes and sent the email. Then he sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. The next morning, Keisha found him still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. "Dad," she said quietly, "you look terrible." Thomas looked up. "I might lose my job over this. Or worse." Keisha sat down across from him. "Is it the right thing to do?" Thomas nodded. "Yes." "Then do it." Thomas reached across the table and squeezed her hand. He had made his decision. Tuesday night, when he picked me up from the VA center, he would tell me everything. He would play the recordings. He would show me the notes. He would convince me that my daughter and her husband were planning to take everything from me. And if I did not believe him, he would go to the police anyway. But Thomas did not know that by Tuesday it might already be too late. Monday afternoon, Jessica drove me to see Dr. Lawson. I thought it was just a routine checkup. It was not. It was 2 o'clock when we pulled into the parking lot of a medical office building on South Lake Avenue in Pasadena. The building was modern, clean, and expensive looking, the kind of place that made you feel like you were in good hands. Jessica walked me inside and checked me in at the front desk. We sat together in the waiting room for a few minutes, not saying much. She flipped through a magazine. I stared at the wall. When the nurse called my name, Jessica squeezed my hand. "I'll be right here, Dad. You've got this." I nodded and followed the nurse down a long hallway. Dr. Richard Lawson's office was exactly what you would expect from a geriatric specialist. Diplomas and certifications lined the walls, medical school board, certifications, memberships in professional organizations. There was a framed photo of him shaking hands with someone important. Everything about the room was designed to project competence and trustworthiness. Dr. Lawson himself was in his early 60s with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a calm, professional demeanor. He shook my hand and gestured for me to sit down. "Mr. Hayes," he said warmly, "thank you for coming in. Your daughter is very concerned about you." I nodded. "She worries too much." Dr. Lawson smiled. "That's what daughters do." He started with the standard questions. "What year is it?" 2024, I said. "And who is the president?" I hesitated. "Donald Trump just started his 2nd term." "Good," Dr. Lawson said. "Now I'm going to say 3 words. I want you to remember them, and I'll ask you to repeat them back to me in a few minutes. Apple, table, penny." I repeated them. Apple, table, penny. "Excellent." He handed me a piece of paper and a pen. "I'd like you to draw a clock for me. Put the numbers on the face and set the hands to 11:10. I drew the clock. It looked fine to me. The numbers were in the right places. The hands pointed to 11:10. Dr. Lawson nodded and set the paper aside. Next, he gave me a list of 5 words and asked me to remember them. Then he asked me to count backward from 100, subtracting 7 each time. 100, I said. 93, 86, 79, 72. I made it all the way down to 30-something before he stopped me. "Very good," he said. Then he asked me to recall the 5 words from earlier. I remembered 4 out of 5. I thought that was pretty good. "And the 3 words from the beginning?" he asked. "Apple, table, penny." Dr. Lawson wrote something down in his notes. He was quiet for a long time, his expression carefully neutral. Then he looked up at me, his brow furrowed. "Mr. Hayes," he said slowly, "I'm concerned." I blinked, concerned about what I answered everything correctly. "Memory loss starts subtly," Dr. Lawson said. "It's not always about getting the wrong answer. It's about the patterns, the small hesitations, The minor confusions. I frowned. I didn't hesitate. Based on this evaluation, Dr. Lawson continued as if I had not spoken, I'm seeing signs of early-stage cognitive decline. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Cognitive decline. Yes, Dr. Lawson said. It's not severe yet, but it's there, and it will progress. I shook my head. No, that's not I'm fine. I feel fine. Dr. Lawson pulled out a prescription pad and started writing. I'm prescribing donepezil. It's a medication for early-stage dementia. It won't reverse the condition, but it may slow the progression. I stared at him, my mind spinning. Dementia. I don't have dementia. Dr. Lawson set the prescription down on the desk and looked at me with what I thought was sympathy. I know this is difficult to hear, Mr. Hayes, but early intervention is crucial. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Can you send Jessica in, please? A moment later, Jessica appeared in the doorway. Doctor, Lawson turned to her, as if I were no longer in the room. Your father needs close supervision. I recommend you consider placing him in an assisted living facility within the next few months, for his own safety. Jessica's eyes widened. She put her hand over her mouth. Oh my God! Dad, why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I stood up, my hands shaking. It's not that bad, I'm fine. Dr. Lawson's voice was calm but firm. Denial is common in patients with cognitive decline, Jessica. He may not be able to accurately assess his own condition. Jessica nodded, tears streaming down her face. She reached for my hand. Dad, it's okay. We'll figure this out. I pulled my hand away. There's nothing to figure out. I don't have dementia. But no one was listening. Dr. Lawson handed me the prescription. Take this to your pharmacy, 1 tablet daily, and make sure someone is checking in on you regularly. I took the paper, my hands trembling, and walked out of the office in a daze. Jessica followed me to the car. She did not say anything. She just drove. When we got back to my house, she hugged me tightly. I love you, Dad. We're going to get through this. I nodded, but I could not speak. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the prescription in my hand. Donepezil. For dementia. I walked out of that office with a prescription I did not need and a diagnosis I did not have. I did not know that Dr. Lawson had been paid to destroy my life. Tuesday night, I climbed into Thomas's car with a heavy heart. It was 10:45, and the VA Medical Center parking lot was nearly empty. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. I opened the passenger door and slid into the seat, holding my thermos of coffee. For the first time in weeks, I forgot to hand Thomas his cup. Thomas glanced at me, and I saw his expression change immediately. Mr. Hayes, he said quietly. What's wrong? I exhaled slowly, staring out the windshield at nothing. I went to the doctor yesterday. He told me I have early-stage dementia. Thomas's hands tightened on the steering wheel. His knuckles went white under the glow of the dashboard lights. He did not say anything right away. He just sat there staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched. What doctor? He asked finally, his voice carefully controlled. Dr. Lawson, I said. Jessica took me. He's a geriatric specialist in Pasadena. She made the appointment last week. Thomas's breathing was shallow. I could see his chest rising and falling like he was trying to keep himself calm. What did he say? Thomas asked. I shrugged helplessly. He did all these tests, memory tests, asked me what year it is, who the president is, made me draw a clock, made me remember words. I thought I did fine, but he said I have cognitive decline. Did you get the answers wrong? Thomas asked. No, I said. I got most of them right. I remembered the words. Well, 4 out of 5. I drew the clock correctly. I counted backward from 100, subtracting 7 each time. I made it down to the 30s before he stopped me. Thomas turned to look at me. Then why did he say you have dementia? He said it wasn't about getting the answers right, I explained. He said it was about patterns, subtle signs, small hesitations, things I couldn't see but he could. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, his voice low and fierce, Mr. Hayes, I don't believe you have dementia. I blinked, caught off guard. What? You teach classes 3 nights a week, Thomas said. Complex technical skills, circuitry design, systems troubleshooting. You remember our conversations. You remember details about my daughter. You remember that she wants to study aerospace engineering. You remember that I used to work in insurance fraud. You remember the coffee? I like black, no sugar. I opened my mouth to respond, but Thomas kept going, his words coming faster now. That's not someone with cognitive decline, he said. That's someone with a sharp mind. Someone who's fully present. Someone who pays attention. But the doctor, someone wants you to believe you're sick, Thomas said, and there was urgency in his voice now. Because if you believe that you'll be easier to control, if you believe you can't trust your own mind, you'll trust other people to make decisions for you. You'll sign papers you wouldn't normally sign. You'll agree to things you wouldn't normally agree to. I laughed, but it sounded hollow. Thomas, that's ridiculous. Why would anyone do that? Thomas did not answer. He just looked at me, his eyes dark and serious. Jessica is my daughter, I said, my voice rising slightly. She's been worried about me since Margaret died. She's trying to help. Is she? Thomas asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell Thomas that he was wrong, that he was being paranoid, that Jessica loved me and would never hurt me. But something in his voice stopped me. Thomas reached into the pocket behind his seat and pulled out his phone. He held it up so I could see the screen. Voice memos. There were 4 recordings listed, each one labeled with a date and a name. Brad M., November 9th. Brad M., November 14th. Brad M., November 17th. Brad M., November 24th. I frowned. Who's Brad? Thomas's voice was steady, but I could hear the tension beneath it. Your son-in-law. The world seemed to tilt sideways. I've been driving him for 3 weeks, Thomas said. He doesn't know I'm your driver. He doesn't know we know each other. And he's been talking. A lot. I stared at the phone, my mind struggling to catch up. Talking about what you, Thomas, said. Your house, your money, your daughter, and a plan to take everything from you. My mouth went dry. That's impossible. Mr. Hayes, Thomas said quietly. I need to show you something, but not here, not in the car. Can I come inside when we get to your house just for a few minutes? I shook my head, still trying to process what he was saying. Thomas, this is crazy. Jessica wouldn't. I have proof, Thomas said, and his voice was urgent now. I have recordings. I have dates. I have names. I need you to hear them. I need you to listen, and then you can decide for yourself. Why now? I asked. Why tonight? Thomas's eyes met mine, and I saw something in them I had never seen before. Fear. Real, raw fear. Because tomorrow might be too late. The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat there in silence, staring at him, my heart pounding. Thomas had been my driver for months. He had been dependable, kind, thoughtful. He had waited until I was safely inside my house before driving away. He had remembered my routine. He had brought his daughter into our conversations because he trusted me. And now he was asking me to trust him. I looked down at the phone in his hand. 4 recordings. 4 dates. Brad's name. "What's on those recordings?" I asked quietly. "Everything," Thomas said. "The whole plan. Start to finish." I closed my eyes and took a slow breath. When I opened them again, Thomas was still watching me, waiting. "Okay," I said finally. "Come inside." Thomas nodded, and I saw the tension in his shoulders ease just slightly. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and put the car in drive. "Thank you," he said quietly. We pulled out of the parking lot and onto the street. The city lights blurred past the windows. Neither of us spoke. I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to know what was on those recordings. I should have told Thomas to take me home and leave me alone, but something in his voice told me that this was serious, deadly serious, and I was right. But we never made it inside, because Thomas saw something I did not. Thomas drove toward my house on Cedar Street, the same route we had taken dozens of times before. I sat in silence, staring out the window, my mind still spinning from what he had just told me. Recordings. Brad. A plan. It did not make sense. None of it made sense. "Mr. Hayes," Thomas said quietly, "I need to drive past your house once before we stop. Just trust me." I frowned. "Why?" "Just trust me," Thomas repeated. He turned onto Cedar Street and slowed the car to a crawl. I looked out the window at my house, the wide front porch, the detached garage, the jacaranda tree in the yard. Everything looked normal, quiet, safe. But Thomas was not looking at my house. He was looking at the street. And then I saw his hands tighten on the steering wheel. "What?" I started to say. "Don't react," Thomas said, his voice low and tense. "Just act normal." I looked ahead, trying to see what he was seeing. At first, I did not notice anything. Just parked cars, dark windows, empty sidewalks. And then I saw them. 2 men standing on the sidewalk across the street from my house. Big men, broad-shouldered, wearing dark hoodies, hands in their pockets. They were not talking. They were not moving. They were just standing there watching. I did not recognize them. I had lived on this street for 30 years, and I had never seen them before. Thomas drove past them without slowing down. He did not stop. He did not turn into my driveway. He just kept going, as if he had missed the street entirely. "Thomas," I said, my voice tight. "What?" "Not yet," Thomas said quietly. He turned the corner onto the next block, and that was when I saw the car. A gray Honda Civic parked at the curb. The engine was running. I could see the faint glow of the taillights, but the headlights were off. And sitting in the driver's seat, phone pressed to his ear, was Brad. My son-in-law, sitting in a car, 1 block from my house, in the dark. Thomas kept driving. He turned left, then left again, looping around the block. He did not say anything. He just drove, his jaw clenched, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. "Thomas," I said, my voice shaking now. "What the hell is going on?" Thomas did not answer right away. He turned into an empty parking lot behind a Vaughn's grocery store and put the car in park. Then he turned to face me. "There were 2 men standing outside your house," Thomas said, his voice steady but urgent. "They were waiting for you." My breath caught in my throat. "Who were they?" "I don't know their names," Thomas said. "But I know why they're there. Your son-in-law hired them. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the words. Hired them for what? Thomas pulled out his phone and opened the voice memos app. He tapped on the most recent recording, Brad M., November 24th. Listen, Thomas said. He pressed play. Brad's voice filled the car, slurred, confident, cold. Wednesday night, when he gets home from volunteering, you go in. He'll be alone. Just get him to sign the asset transfer. If he refuses, a pause. Another voice, faint but audible. We know what to do. Brad again. Make it clean, old man. Heart attack, whatever. Just make it look natural. The recording stopped. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at the phone in Thomas's hand. That was Friday night, Thomas said quietly. 5 days ago. He said Wednesday night. Tonight is Tuesday. I looked up at him, my heart pounding. Wednesday, tomorrow. Thomas nodded. They were early, or maybe they were scoping out the area. Either way, they're there, right now, waiting for you. I felt like I could not breathe. Brad, my son-in-law. He hired people to... Yes, Thomas said. And Jessica? Thomas hesitated. I don't know. In one of the recordings, Brad says she doesn't know about this part, but she knows about the rest of it. The doctor, the diagnosis, the power of attorney. I leaned back in my seat, my hands shaking. I don't understand. Why would they? Money, Thomas said simply. Your house, your retirement accounts. Brad mentioned a debt, $400,000. They need your money, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get it. I closed my eyes, trying to make sense of it all. Jessica, my daughter, the girl I had raised, the girl I had loved, and Brad, sitting in a car 1 block from my house, waiting. We have to go to the police, I said finally. Yes, Thomas said. Right now. He put the car in drive and pulled out of the parking lot. I watched the streets blur past the windows, my mind still spinning. Mr. Hayes, Thomas said quietly. If I had not been driving Brad these past few weeks, if I had not heard him talking, if I had not been paying attention. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. I felt the car accelerate, felt Thomas's hands gripping the wheel. And for the first time since Margaret died, I felt something in my own home that I had never felt before. Fear. Thomas pulled into an empty parking lot behind the closed Vons. The lot was dark, lit only by a single flickering streetlight. He turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, his hands still gripping the wheel. Then he turned to face me. Mr. Hayes, he said quietly. I need you to listen to me. I need you to listen to everything I'm about to tell you, and I need you not to interrupt until I'm finished. Can you do that? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Thomas took a slow breath. For the past 3 weeks, I've been driving your son-in-law, Brad Morrison. He's a regular passenger, and when he's drunk, he talks. A lot. I stared at him, my mind struggling to catch up. He's been talking about an old man in Pasadena, Thomas continued. A house worth over $2 million, a daughter named Jessica, and a plan to take everything. Thomas pulled out his phone and opened the voice memos app. I recorded him. I know it's questionable ethically. I know I could lose my job over it. But I couldn't let this happen. He held up the phone so I could see the screen. 4 recordings. 4 dates. I'm going to play these for you, Thomas said, and I need you to hear them all the way through. He tapped the first recording. Brad M., November 9th. Brad's voice filled the car. Slurred. Arrogant. Goddamn old man sitting on all that money doing nothing with it. The house in Pasadena alone is worth over $2 million, plus the retirement accounts. We're talking $3 million easy. A pause. The sound of a car door closing. Just get the paperwork signed. Once he's declared incompetent, we move him into a facility. Then we sell the house and liquidate the accounts. Simple. My face went pale. I felt like I could not breathe. Thomas stopped the recording. That was 3 weeks ago, the first time I drove him. He tapped the second recording. Brad M., November 14th. Brad's voice again. Clearer this time. More deliberate. The doctor agreed. Dr. Lawson, $10,000. He'll sign the paperwork. Says the old man has early onset cognitive decline. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. No, I whispered. That's not, Thomas held up his hand. Let me finish. Brad's voice continued. After that, we get power of attorney. Move him into a facility. Sell the house. Easy. Another voice, faint. What about Jessica Brad again? She's on board. She's the one who set up the doctor's appointment. Between the two of us, we're $400,000 in debt. They're coming to collect. I pressed my hands against my face. This can't be happening. Thomas tapped the third recording. Brad M., November 17th. Brad's voice was darker now. Colder. I hired them. 2 guys. They know what to do. A pause. If the old man signs the paperwork, great. If he doesn't, they'll persuade him. Another voice. How hard? Brad laughed. It was a sound I will never forget. Whatever it takes, just don't leave marks. Make it look like he fell or something. My hands were shaking. He's talking about he's planning to... Yes, Thomas said quietly. Jessica doesn't know about this part. Brad's voice continued. She thinks we're just moving him into a care facility nice and clean. But I'm not taking any chances. Thomas stopped the recording. He looked at me, his expression somber. Mr. Hayes, he's not talking about scaring you. He's talking about making sure something happens to you. I could not speak. I could not move. I just sat there staring at the phone in Thomas's hand. Thomas tapped the fourth recording. Brad M., November 24th. Brad's voice. Sober this time. Precise. Let me confirm the timeline. The doctor sees him on Monday. Dr. Lawson signs the paperwork. Cognitive decline. We'll have power of attorney by Wednesday. A pause. Wednesday night, when he gets home from volunteering, you go in. He'll be alone. Just get him to sign the asset transfer. If he refuses... Another voice. We know what to do. Brad. Make it clean. Old man. Heart attack. Whatever. Just make it look natural. Thomas stopped the recording. Today is Tuesday, he said quietly. Tomorrow is Wednesday. The men standing outside your house tonight, those are the men he hired. I felt tears running down my face. I did not even realize I was crying. Jessica, I whispered. My daughter. She knew about the fraud. She knew about the doctor, but she didn't know about... She didn't know he was planning to hurt you, Thomas said gently. At least not according to the recordings, but she knew about the rest of it. The fake diagnosis, the power of attorney, The plan to take your money. I slumped forward in my seat, covering my face with my hands. Sobs shook my body. Deep, wrenching sobs that I could not control. My daughter, I choked out. My only child. She wanted to rob me. And a stranger, someone I've only known for a few months, is the only person trying to save my life. Thomas did not say anything. He just sat there letting me cry. I sat in that empty parking lot and felt my entire world collapse. Everything I had believed in family safety home, it was all a lie. Margaret was gone. Jessica had betrayed me. And Brad, my son-in-law, the man I had welcomed into my family, had hired people to make sure I did not survive the week. What do I do? I whispered, finally my voice broken. Thomas put his hand on my shoulder. We go to the police. Right now. I nodded, unable to speak. Thomas started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. I watched the streetlights blur past the windows, my mind numb. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly alone. Thomas did not ask if I wanted to go to the police. He just started the car and drove. I sat in silence, staring out the window, my mind numb. The streets blurred past. Traffic lights, dark storefronts, empty sidewalks. Everything looked the same as it always had. But nothing would ever be the same again. At 11:45, Thomas pulled into the parking lot of the Pasadena Police Department on North Garfield Avenue. The building was lit up against the night sky, all glass and concrete and authority. Thomas turned off the engine and looked at me. Are you ready? I nodded, even though I was not sure I was. We walked inside together. The lobby was bright and sterile, with fluorescent lights and pale tile floors. A young officer sat behind the front desk, looking tired. Can I help you? He asked. Thomas stepped forward, his voice steady and clear. My name is Thomas Reed. This is Robert Hayes. His life is in danger tonight. His family is conspiring to defraud him and harm him. I have audio recordings as evidence. The officer blinked, suddenly more alert. Recordings, yes, Thomas said. 4 of them, spanning 3 weeks. I need to speak to a detective. Right now. The officer picked up his phone and made a call. A few minutes later, a man in a rumpled suit walked into the lobby. He was in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes. I'm Detective Sullivan, he said. Come with me. He led us down a hallway and into a small interview room. There was a table, a few chairs, a recorder mounted on the wall. Detective Sullivan gestured for us to sit. Start from the beginning, he said. I took a slow breath and began. I told him about Margaret, about the accident on the 210 freeway 8 months ago, about Jessica visiting more often after the funeral, about the questions she asked about my will, my retirement accounts, my money. I told him about the doctor's appointment, about Dr. Lawson in Pasadena, about the diagnosis I did not believe, about the prescription for donepezil. Thomas took over. He explained that he was a rideshare driver, that he had been driving Brad Morrison, my son-in-law, for the past 3 weeks, that Brad had been drunk, that Brad had talked. Thomas pulled out his phone and set it on the table. I recorded him 4 times. I know it's not standard procedure, but I had to. I knew something was wrong. Detective Sullivan leaned forward. Did the passenger consent to being recorded? Uber's terms of service allow drivers to record rides for safety purposes, Thomas said. Passengers consent by using the service. It's all documented. Sullivan nodded slowly. Play them. Thomas played all 4 recordings, one by one. Brad's voice filled the room. Cold, calculating, unrepentant. Over 2 million. Power of attorney. Move him into a facility. Dr. Lawson? $10,000. Cognitive decline. Hired 2 guys. Persuade him. Make it look like he fell. Monday, the doctor. Wednesday night, you go in. By the time the last recording ended, Detective Sullivan's expression had changed. His jaw was tight. His eyes were hard. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, "do you consent to us investigating your daughter and son-in-law?" I felt tears prick my eyes. "Yes." Sullivan stood up and walked to the door. He called out to someone in the hallway. "Ramirez, get Captain Torres. We need teams mobilized. Now." Within 10 minutes, the station was buzzing with activity. Officers in tactical gear, radios crackling, maps spread out on desks. Detective Sullivan came back into the room. "Mr. Hayes, we're sending 3 teams. 1 to your house, 1 to Brad Morrison's address in Glendale, 1 to Jessica Morrison's address in Arcadia. We'll have them in custody within the hour." I nodded, unable to speak. At 2:30 in the morning, Detective Sullivan's radio crackled. Team 1 reporting, 2 suspects apprehended outside 1247 Cedar Street, Pasadena. Male, mid-30s, both armed. Found a handgun, zip ties, and duct tape in their vehicle. Sullivan looked at me. "Those are the men who were waiting for you." I felt like I was going to be sick. Team 2 reporting, Brad Morrison in custody, Glendale address, charged with conspiracy to commit elder abuse, conspiracy to commit assault and fraud. Team 3 reporting, Jessica Morrison in custody, Arcadia address, charged with conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of an elder and fraud. Sullivan turned to me. "Mr. Hayes, if you had gone home tonight, you would not have survived." I pressed my hands against the table, trying to steady myself. My chest felt tight. My vision blurred. "We're seizing their phones and computers," Sullivan continued. "We'll find more evidence, emails, text messages, financial records. This case is airtight." At 3:30 in the morning, Thomas and I walked out of the police station. The sky was still dark. The air was cold. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at nothing, trying to process what had just happened. "Mr. Hayes," Thomas said quietly, "you can't go home tonight. It's a crime scene, and you shouldn't be alone." I looked at him exhausted. "Where am I supposed to go?" "My place," Thomas said. "It's not much, but my daughter and I have a spare room. You'll be safe." I nodded, too tired to argue. Thomas drove through the empty streets toward Inglewood. The city was quiet, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. As we turned onto Thomas's street, he glanced at me. "You're about to meet my daughter, Keisha. She's 16, smart as hell, wants to be an aerospace engineer." I felt something shift in my chest. "Like me?" "Yeah," Thomas said softly. "Like you." And for the first time that night, I felt something other than grief. I felt something like hope. Thomas's house in Inglewood was small, but it was full of something my house had been missing for months: warmth. It was 4 in the morning when we pulled into the driveway. The neighborhood was quiet. Streetlights flickered. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Thomas unlocked the front door, and we stepped inside. The living room was tidy, but lived in a worn couch, a coffee table stacked with textbooks, a bookshelf crammed with novels and engineering manuals. "Keisha," Thomas called softly. "Come down here for a second." A moment later, I heard footsteps on the stairs. A teenage girl appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She was tall and slender, with her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She wore an oversized Caltech sweatshirt and pajama pants. "Dad," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "What's going on?" Thomas put his hand on her shoulder. "Keisha, this is Mr. Hayes, Robert. He's going to stay with us for a few days. He's had a rough night." Keisha looked at me, and I saw her expression soften. "Hi, Mr. Hayes." "Hi, Keisha," I said quietly. Thomas explained briefly, without going into too much detail, that I could not stay at my house right now, that I needed a safe place, that I was a friend. Keisha nodded, taking it all in. Then she looked at her father. "He can have my room. I'll sleep on the couch." "Keisha, you don't have to," I started. "It's okay," she said, smiling. "Really, I do it all the time when I'm studying late anyway." Thomas squeezed her shoulder. "Thank you, sweetheart." Keisha led me upstairs to her room. It was small, but bright, with a window overlooking the street. And it was filled with dreams. Posters of the solar system covered the walls. A framed photograph of the Hubble Space Telescope. A diagram of the Mars Curiosity rover. Her desk was stacked with calculus textbooks, physics notes, and a half-built model of the Saturn V rocket. I stood in the doorway, staring. You really want to be an aerospace engineer," I said. Keisha grinned. "Dad told me you used to work at JPL. Is that true?" "Yes," I said. 32 years. Her eyes lit up. "That's amazing. What did you work on?" "Thermal management systems," I said. "For deep space missions, Voyager, Mars rovers. Some classified projects I can't talk about." Keisha's smile widened. "That's so cool." I felt something shift in my chest. For the first time in months, I felt like I had something to offer. Something to give. "Get some sleep, Mr. Hayes," Keisha said. "We can talk more tomorrow." "Thank you, Keisha," I said quietly. She nodded and slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her. I sat down on the bed and stared at the posters on the walls, at the dreams of a 16-year-old girl who wanted to reach the stars. And I thought about Jessica, about the daughter I had raised, the daughter who had tried to take everything from me. Thomas appeared in the doorway. "You okay?" "Your daughter is special," I said. Thomas smiled. "I know. Everything I do for her. She's lucky to have you." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Get some rest. We'll figure everything out tomorrow." Over the next 3 days, I stayed at Thomas's house, and Detective Sullivan kept me updated. On Wednesday, Sullivan called. We found emails between Brad Morrison and Dr. Richard Lawson. Bank records show a $10,000 payment from Brad to Lawson labeled as a consulting fee. Lawson's in deep. I closed my eyes. So it was all fake. The diagnosis, the prescription, all of it. "Yes," Sullivan said. "All of it." On Thursday, Sullivan called again. We searched Jessica's apartment, found credit card bills totaling over $220,000. Gambling debts. Loans from unlicensed lenders, loan sharks. We also discovered she was fired from her accounting firm 18 months ago for embezzlement. She never told you. I felt like I had been punched. She told me she quit. She said she wanted a change. "She lied," Sullivan said gently. "I'm sorry." He continued. "The 2 men we arrested at your house, they're talking. They confirmed Brad hired them, $5,000 each. Their job was to force you to sign documents transferring your assets. If you refused, They were instructed to make it look like an accident. My hands were shaking. And Amiam Hussein and Jessica. Sullivan hesitated. She's admitted to the financial fraud. She knew about the fake diagnosis. She knew about the plan to get power of attorney. But she claims she didn't know Brad was planning to hurt you. She says he told her you'd just be moved into a care facility. Do you believe her? I asked. Sullivan was quiet. I don't know, Mr. Hayes, but the law will decide. On Friday, Sullivan called one last time. Dr. Lawson has been arrested. We found falsified medical records for at least 12 other elderly patients over the past 5 years. He's been running this scam for a long time. You weren't the first, but because of you, you'll be the last. I sat on Thomas's couch staring at the phone in my hand. 12 other people, 12 other families destroyed. During those 3 days, Keisha and I talked. A lot. She asked me about the Voyager missions, about the Golden Record, about what it was like to work on something that would leave the solar system and travel into interstellar space. I told her about the Mars rovers, about Spirit and Opportunity, about how we designed systems that could survive temperatures of minus 100 degrees Celsius and still function after years in the Martian dust. Keisha listened with wide eyes, asking questions, taking notes, dreaming. And for the first time since Margaret died, I felt like I had a purpose again. On Friday night, Thomas and Keisha made dinner spaghetti and garlic bread. We sat around the small kitchen table, and for a moment it felt like family. After Keisha went to bed, Thomas and I sat in the living room. What are you going to do? Thomas asked. I was quiet for a long time. Then I said, I don't know if I can ever forgive Jessica, but I know one thing. I will never trust her again. Thomas nodded. I understand. She's my daughter, I said, my voice breaking. And she tried to destroy me. Thomas reached over and squeezed my shoulder. You're going to get through this. You're stronger than you think. I looked at him, this man who had saved my life, who had opened his home to me, who had given me a place to heal. Thank you, Thomas, I said quietly. For everything. He nodded. You're family now. And sitting there in that small house in Inglewood, I realized he was right. 6 months later, I sat in a Pasadena courtroom and watched my daughter pay the price for what she had done. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Brad Morrison was charged with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud. Jessica was charged with financial exploitation of an elder and conspiracy to commit fraud, but not with attempted murder. Dr. Richard Lawson was charged with medical fraud conspiracy and falsifying medical records. The 2 men Brad had hired were charged with conspiracy to commit assault and attempted extortion. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, observers, people who had read about the case in the news and wanted to see how it would end. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, trying to keep my breathing steady. Thomas sat beside me. He had taken time off work to be there. Keisha sat on his other side, her hand resting on his arm. The first week of the trial was all evidence. The prosecution presented the 4 audio recordings Thomas had made. Brad's voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating. Over 2 million. Power of attorney. Move him into a facility. Dr. Lawson, $10,000. Cognitive decline. Hired 2 guys. Make it look like he fell. Wednesday night you go in. The jury listened in silence. Some of them looked shocked. Others looked disgusted. The prosecution also presented emails between Brad and Dr. Lawson. Bank records showing the $10,000 payment. Financial records showing Jessica's $220,000 debt. And medical files showing that Dr. Lawson had falsified diagnoses for at least 12 other elderly patients, over the past 5 years. By the end of the first week, the evidence was overwhelming. The second week was testimony. Thomas took the stand first. He wore a simple gray suit and spoke clearly, calmly, the way he always did. The prosecutor asked him how he had met me. Thomas explained that he was a rideshare driver, that I had been his passenger for several months, that we had developed a friendship. Then the prosecutor asked him about Brad. Thomas explained that Brad had been his passenger as well, that Brad had been drunk on multiple occasions, that Brad had talked about an old man in Pasadena, about a house worth millions, about a plan to take everything. "Why did you record him?" the prosecutor asked. Thomas looked at the jury. "Because I'm a former insurance fraud investigator. I spent 12 years identifying people who exploit vulnerable populations. And 3 years ago, I tried to stop a doctor who was defrauding elderly patients. I failed. I was fired for trying to do the right thing." He paused, his voice steady but firm. "I couldn't let another elderly person be exploited. Especially not someone I knew, someone I cared about." The prosecutor nodded. "And what did you do with the recordings?" "I took them to Mr. Hayes," Thomas said. "And then we went to the police." "Why didn't you go to the police first?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because Mr. Hayes needed to hear it himself. He needed to know that his family was planning to hurt him, and he needed to make the decision to act." The prosecutor asked one final question. "Do you believe that if Mr. Hayes had gone home that night, he would have survived?" Thomas looked directly at the jury. "No, I don't. The 2 men Brad hired were waiting outside his house. They were armed. They had zip ties and duct tape. If Mr. Hayes had gone inside, he would not have walked back out." The courtroom was silent. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor asked me to describe my life before the events of November. I told them about Margaret, about the accident on the 210 freeway, about the grief that had consumed me for months. I told them about Jessica, about how she had started visiting more often, about how she had asked questions about my will, my retirement accounts, my money. "Did you find that unusual?" the prosecutor asked. "At the time, no," I said. "I thought she was being thoughtful. I thought she was worried about me. And now?" I looked across the courtroom at Jessica. She was sitting at the defense table, her hands folded, her eyes red. "Now I know she was planning to rob me," I said quietly. The prosecutor asked me about the doctor's appointment. I described Dr. Lawson's office, the tests, the diagnosis, the prescription for donepezil. "Did you believe the diagnosis?" the prosecutor asked. "At first, yes," I said. But then Thomas told me he didn't think I had dementia. He said someone wanted me to believe I was sick, so I would be easier to control. And he was right. The prosecutor asked me one final question. "Do you believe your daughter wanted you dead?" I was quiet for a long time. The courtroom was silent, waiting. "No," I said finally. "I don't think Jessica wanted me dead, but I think she wanted my money, and I think she didn't care what Brad had to do to get it." I looked at Jessica again. She was crying now, her shoulders shaking. "I don't think she ever asked," I said, my voice breaking. "I don't think she wanted to know." The third week was the defense. Jessica took the stand. She wore a simple blue dress, and her hair was pulled back. She looked thinner than I remembered. Older. Her lawyer asked her to explain what had happened. Jessica's voice was quiet, trembling. "I made a terrible mistake," she said. "I got into debt, gambling, bad loans. I owed over $200,000. The people I owed, they were threatening me. They said they would hurt me if I didn't pay. She wiped her eyes. Brad said he had a plan. He said we could get power of attorney, move my father into a care facility, sell the house, pay off the debts. He said it would be simple. He said no one would get hurt. Did you know Brad was planning to harm your father? Her lawyer asked. Jessica shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No. I swear I didn't know. I thought my father would just be moved into a nice facility. Somewhere safe. I didn't know Brad had hired people. I didn't know he was planning to. She broke down sobbing. I'm so sorry, Dad. She whispered, looking at me. I'm so sorry. I looked away. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When the jury returned to the courtroom, silence fell like a heavy curtain over every person in the room. I sat in the front row, Thomas beside me, his hand steady on my shoulder. After 3 weeks of testimony, 4 audio recordings played repeatedly in open court emails documenting a $10,000 bribe falsified medical records for over a dozen elderly patients, and tearful confessions from my daughter Jessica, the 12 jurors filed into the jury box without expression. Their faces were blank, unreadable, as if they had seen something that had drained them of emotion. Judge Anderson, a gray-haired man in his 60s with deep lines around his eyes, looked out over the packed courtroom. Reporters filled the back rows, their pens poised. Family members of other victims sat to my left. Thomas's daughter Keisha, now 17 and preparing for her freshman year at Caltech, sat beside her father. She had become like family to me over the past 6 months. The judge asked the foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a blue sweater, to read the verdicts. In the matter of the state of California versus Bradley James Morrison, she began, her voice flat and careful. On the charge of conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to cause serious bodily harm with intent to defraud, we find the defendant guilty. Brad, seated at the defense table in an orange Los Angeles County Jail jumpsuit, showed no emotion. His attorney, a young man in an expensive suit, placed a hand on his arm, but Brad simply stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. I saw no remorse, no fear, only a cold calculation that this day had always been a possibility. In the matter of the state of California versus Jessica Lynn Hayes Morrison, the foreperson continued. On the charge of financial exploitation of an elder, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Jessica gasped, a sharp intake of breath that carried across the silent room. She turned toward me, tears streaming down her face, but I looked away. I could not meet her eyes. Not yet. In the matter of the state of California versus Dr. Richard Lawson, the foreperson said, on the charge of medical fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit elder abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of falsifying medical records, we find the defendant guilty. Dr. Lawson, a man in his late 50s with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses, dropped his head into his hands. His attorney leaned in and whispered urgently, but the doctor did not respond. He simply sat there, shoulders shaking. In the matter of the state of California versus Harold Eugene Martinez and Tyrell James Collins, the foreperson concluded, referring to the 2 hired men who had waited outside my house that Wednesday night with a handgun, zip ties, and duct tape, on the charges of conspiracy to commit assault and attempted extortion, we find both defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Several reporters stood to leave. Judge Anderson struck his gavel 3 times, the sharp crack echoing through the room. Order. This court will reconvene in 2 weeks for sentencing. All defendants are remanded into custody. Bailiff, please escort the defendants. 2 weeks later, I returned to the same courtroom for sentencing. The gallery was just as full, perhaps more so. Thomas sat beside me again. Keisha had an exam at school, but she had sent me a text that morning. "You've got this, Mr. Hayes. You're braver than you think." Judge Anderson addressed each defendant in turn, starting with Brad Morrison. "Mr. Morrison," the judge said, his voice stern, "you orchestrated a scheme designed to strip an elderly man of his autonomy, his assets, and quite possibly his life. You paid $10,000 to a corrupt physician to falsify a diagnosis. You hired 2 men with criminal records to wait outside Mr. Hayes's home with weapons and restraints. You did all of this while your wife, the victim's own daughter, manipulated and gaslighted him. The prosecution has argued for the maximum sentence, and after reviewing the evidence, I agree. You are sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison." Brad's face remained blank. His attorney whispered something, but Brad simply nodded once. Next, the judge turned to Jessica. "Ms. Hayes Morrison." Judge Anderson said, his tone softer but still firm. "The court acknowledges that you were under significant financial pressure. A $220,000 gambling debt, a history of job loss due to embezzlement and manipulation by your husband are all mitigating factors. However, you actively participated in this conspiracy. You gaslighted your own father, made him doubt his memory, scheduled a fraudulent medical appointment, and attempted to secure power of attorney under false pretenses. You betrayed your own father for money. That is a wound that may never heal. You are sentenced to 12 years in state prison." Jessica's attorney stood and began to argue for a reduced sentence, but the judge raised his hand. "The sentence stands," he said. Dr. Lawson was next. "Dr. Lawson," Judge Anderson said, his voice filled with disgust, "you exploited the trust society places in physicians. Over a period of at least 5 years, you falsified diagnoses for a minimum of 12 elderly patients, accepting payments ranging from $5,000 to $15,000. You destroyed lives for profit. You are a danger to the vulnerable. You are sentenced to 8 years in state prison, and your medical license is permanently revoked." Dr. Lawson did not look up. Finally, the judge addressed Harold Martinez and Tyrell Collins. "Mr. Martinez and Mr. Collins," he said, "you were hired to commit violence against an elderly man for $5,000 each. You both have prior felony records. You waited outside his home with weapons and restraints. The only reason you did not succeed was that Mr. Hayes never entered his home that night. You are each sentenced to 15 years in state prison." Before the hearing concluded, Judge Anderson looked at me. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "the court recognizes your courage in coming forward. You have the opportunity to make a victim impact statement if you wish." I stood my legs, trembling. I turned to face Jessica, who sat at the defense table in a gray jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. "Jessica," I began, my voice breaking, "you were my only daughter. I held you the day you were born at Huntington Memorial Hospital. I taught you to ride a bike on Cedar Street. I sat in the audience at your high school graduation. I walked you down the aisle on your wedding day. When your mother Margaret died 8 months ago in a highway accident, you were the first person I called. You came to the funeral. You hugged me. You promised you would always be there for me." Jessica sobbed, her shoulders shaking violently. "But you chose something else." I continued, tears streaming down my face. "You chose debt over family. You chose lies over love. You brought me to a fraudulent doctor who diagnosed me with a disease I did not have. So you and your husband could take my home, my savings, and my freedom. You scheduled a fake appointment for a Monday, knowing that 2 days later on Wednesday night, men with weapons would be waiting outside my house to force me to sign away everything, or worse." I paused, trying to steady my voice. "If my rideshare driver Thomas Reed had not been paying attention, if he had not recognized your husband Brad from previous rides, If he had not recorded Brad's drunken confessions, if he had not driven past my house that Wednesday night, instead of stopping, I would have walked through my front door and into a trap. I would not be standing here today. Jessica looked up, her face red and swollen with tears. Dad, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to get hurt. I will always love you, Jessica. I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. But I will never trust you again. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing. As the bailiff stepped forward to lead Jessica away, she turned back one last time, her voice choked with sobs. I love you, Dad. I nodded, but I felt nothing inside. No peace, no satisfaction, only a deep, bottomless emptiness that seemed to expand with every breath. Thomas placed his hand on my shoulder. Let's go home, he said softly. We walked out of the Pasadena courthouse into the bright California sunlight. The trial was over. Justice had been served. But as I climbed into Thomas's car and watched the courthouse disappear in the side mirror, I realized something: the wound Jessica had left would take years to heal if it ever did. 2 years have passed since the night Thomas drove past my house instead of stopping. I am 70 years old now. I still live in the same craftsman-style house on Cedar Street in Pasadena. The house Margaret and I bought decades ago for a little under $400,000. The house that is now worth over $2 million. The house my daughter Jessica and her husband Brad Morrison tried to steal from me. But I am no longer alone. 6 months after the trial, Thomas and his daughter Keisha moved in with me. Thomas no longer drives for Uber. Technically, I hired him as my personal assistant, helping me manage my finances, coordinate my volunteer work at the VA Medical Center, and maintain the house. But that is just a formality. In reality, we treat each other like family. Keisha is 18 now. Last fall, she was accepted into the California Institute of Technology, known to everyone in Pasadena simply as Caltech, with a major in aerospace engineering. When the acceptance letter arrived, she ran through the house screaming, waving the envelope in the air. Thomas cried. I cried too, remembering the first night I met her. A quiet 16-year-old girl with a poster of the Hubble Space Telescope on her bedroom wall and a half-built model of the Saturn V rocket on her desk. I cover all of Keisha's tuition, housing, and living expenses. It is not charity. It is an investment in a brilliant young mind, and more than that, it is what family does. In return, Keisha lets me be her informal advisor. Every evening when she comes home from campus, we sit together in my old study, the one with the framed photos of the Voyager spacecraft and the Mars rovers on the walls. And I teach her about orbital mechanics, thermal systems, and the real stories behind the missions that made history at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Watching her eyes light up when she finally understands a concept. Seeing her sketch out a trajectory calculation on the whiteboard I installed last year. Hearing her ask the kinds of questions I used to ask my own mentors 40 years ago at JPL fills me with a kind of joy I thought I had lost forever. Every month I receive a letter from Jessica. She writes from the California Institution for Women in Corona, where she is serving her 12-year sentence. The letters arrive in plain white envelopes with the prison's return address stamped in the corner. Jessica writes about her regret about the gambling addiction treatment program she has enrolled in, about the therapy sessions she attends twice a week. She writes that she understands why I have not responded, that she does not expect forgiveness, but that she wants me to know she is trying to become a better person. I keep the letters in a shoebox in the back of my closet. I have not read most of them. Perhaps one day I will. Perhaps one day I will write back. But not today. The wound is still too deep. This morning, I woke up at 6:30 the way I have every morning for the past 50 years. I walked downstairs in my slippers and made a pot of coffee, the same dark roast Thomas and I buy from the grocery store on South Lake Avenue. Thomas came down a few minutes later, already dressed in jeans and a Caltech t-shirt Keisha gave him for Father's Day. I poured him a cup without asking. Added no sugar, no cream, exactly the way he likes it. Keisha ran downstairs at 7, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and asked if I could help her with an orbital mechanics problem she was stuck on. We sat together at the kitchen table, the three of us working through the math, while the morning sunlight poured through the window. It felt natural. It felt like home. I think about Margaret often. I think about the 42 years we spent together, the vacations to Yosemite, the quiet Sunday mornings reading the newspaper together, the way she used to hum while she cooked dinner. Losing her in that highway accident was the worst pain I have ever known. It was a pain born of love, of loss, of the natural cruelty of the world. Losing Jessica was different. I lost her not to death, but to betrayal, to greed, to a choice she made to value money over her own father. That is a pain I am not sure I will ever fully understand or accept, but I have gained something I never expected. I have a family again. Not the family I was born into, not the family I raised, but a family I chose and who chose me in return. This is my true story, and it happened right here in Pasadena, California. If my rideshare driver had not driven past my house that Wednesday night, if Thomas Reed had not been paying attention, if he had not recognized the danger and acted, I would be dead. That is not an exaggeration. That is a fact confirmed by the Pasadena Police Department, by Detective Sullivan, by the weapons and restraints found on the two men waiting outside my home. So I want to leave you with this: pay attention to the people around you. Notice when something feels wrong. Kindness is not weakness. Listening can save a life. And sometimes a stranger will care about you more than your own family ever did. I am 70 years old. I still volunteer at the VA Medical Center every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday night, teaching veterans technical skills and listening to their stories. I still live in the house on Cedar Street. I have a family once again, and every morning when I wake up, I am grateful for the night Thomas Reed drove past my driveway instead of stopping. The night he looked in his rearview mirror and saw two men in dark hoodies standing where no one should have been standing. The night he made a choice that saved my life. That is the end of my story. Looking back at my story, I see how blind I was to family betrayal. I never imagined my own daughter could manipulate me for money, or that a rideshare driver would care more about my life than my own blood. This is one of those grandpa stories that sounds impossible until it happens to you. My advice: don't be like me. Don't assume family always means loyalty. Watch for red flags, sudden interest in your finances, questions about your will, attempts to make you doubt your memory. Family betrayal starts with small lies and grows into something deadly. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The lesson I learned: family is not just blood. It's about who shows up when you need them. Thomas Reed was a stranger who risked everything to protect me. That is true family. Keisha, who calls me Grandpa Hayes, reminds me daily that love is a choice, not an obligation. These grandpa stories are not just about survival. They're about recognizing goodness in unexpected places. I believe God put Thomas in my path that night. It was grace, not coincidence. When I share these grandpa stories at the VA Center, I tell veterans pay attention to who truly cares, because sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected stranger. Here is my view: don't wait until it's too late to ask for help. Don't ignore people who notice something is wrong. Never underestimate the courage of a stranger who chooses to care. If you recognize signs of family betrayal or elder abuse in your life, or someone else's, speak up. Call the police. Tell a neighbor. Contact Adult Protective Services. Do not stay silent. I am 70 years old, and I am here because one person refused to look away. Be that person for someone else. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Share your thoughts below. What would you do in Robert's shoes, facing betrayal and survival? If this story moved you, please subscribe for more true life stories. Note: while inspired by actual elder abuse cases, some elements are dramatized for storytelling. Feel free to explore other content if this isn't your preference.